Hello and welcome to the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast, the show all about psychology and changing behaviour. My name is Jamie West. I'm a writer, performer and musician, and I am joined this week by Professor Emeritus Robert West. How are you, Robert?
I'm good, Jamie. This week and every week.
This week and every week. So you've been to Wales? You went in search of colder and rainier weather?
The weather was actually very, very nice. We're in a bit of a heat wave at the moment, although a northern Welsh heat wave is not quite as hot as a London heat wave. But it was lovely. We were up in North Wales in the Conway Valley, which is exceptionally beautiful, and at a very nice family gathering.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Anyway, we are now talking about decision-making in the real world, and we've been looking at the facet framework and how it applies to someone who wants to stop smoking. So we're looking at the cluster of decisions around someone who's chosen to stop smoking. And a quick reminder of what facet is. It's a framework to help us understand decision-making, and it's an acronym. It stands for... Is it an acronym? That's right.
It is an acronym. It is, because remember that an acronym is not just the first letters of words that you want to somehow shorten. It has to form a word if it's to be a proper acronym.
So this is a true acronym. It's FACET, and it stands for Framing, Assessing, Comparing, Enacting, and Time. And we made it all the way back to enacting in this real world scenario. So this is where the tires meet the turf or the road or some kind of tarmac metaphor.
Driving on someone's lawn.
Yeah, which you could be. That might be a decision that you've made. So we've looked at how someone would frame that decision to stop smoking and how they may assess their options, then compare them. And at the end of the comparison, you end up with a choice. You end up with an intention. Mm-hmm. And now it's time to enact. So I'm imagining this is going to be not a smooth ride, because enacting decisions is actually quite difficult, Robert.
It's sometimes very difficult. And of course, in the case of stopping smoking, notoriously difficult, which isn't, if you kind of step back a little bit and think about it, at one level you think, well, that's kind of weird. How hard can it be to enact a decision not to do something? All you have to do is not do it. You know, it's not like it requires a huge amount of skill not to do things. But of course, as we know, it is hard. And so a lot of things come into play that interact with each other in that decision. And we can go through the various different facets that relate to enact in this, because pretty much all of them are relevant. I guess the thing that with smoking cessation, once you've made the decision, let's say, to stop smoking, one of the big decisions is, do I do it straight away or do I do it at some point in the future? And one of the studies that we did, actually following on from some research that was done by a Canadian GP who came to see me once in my office and told me about the work that she'd done. But one of the studies was about spontaneous quit attempts. That is to say, people made the decision to stop and then stopped right away. They didn't wait 5 minutes. They didn't wait 10 minutes. That was it. The decision was put into effect. And what she'd found in a relatively small sample of her patients was that, weirdly, first of all, most attempts to stop smoking were of that kind. Most attempts to stop smoking didn't involve any pre-planning at all. And the decision was enacted as soon as it was made. But even weirder, in a way, was the fact that those decisions were more likely to be successful. In other words, smokers who just decided to stop and then tried to stop immediately were more likely, when you followed them up later to have still not be smoking. And so we did a larger study of that kind with a national sample and found the same thing and published it in the British Medical Journal. It's called, by the way, if anyone wants to look it up, Catastrophic Pathways to Smoking Cessation. And the title, which was probably what helped to get published in this somewhat major medical journal, because it's quite a catchy title, but it was all about catastrophe theory. And the sort of model that we were using was that as in catastrophe theory, that little things can have big effects. And so people would be walking down the street and sort of see someone smoking and think, oh, that's disgusting, and then make a decision to stop, and then it would be, they'd put it into effect. But anyway, the point, I guess, is that the timing of the enactment here turned out to be very important in a way that was a bit counterintuitive, because everyone who I spoke to about it beforehand, saying, what would you guess would be the result of this study, would say that, yeah, of course, people who plan their quit attempts in advance and sort of go through all the preparation that you need to make would, of course, they'd be more effective, but they weren't. And we don't know for sure what the reason for this result was, but my hypothesis is that when you enact a decision straight away like that you could put off, you say, right, no, I'm going to do it now. That says something about your commitment to that decision, and if you can't wait to get going on the decision, then it's something that's more related to your core identity, who you are, what you want, and what you need. If you're the kind of person who's saying, I'm going to stop smoking and I'm going to do it in 2 weeks' time. Okay, that's kind of really. And then by the time you get to 2 weeks' time, there's a good chance that you will have changed your mind because something else will have intervened, or you've gone off the idea.
So this sort of relates to how there can be a disconnect, or not a disconnect, between the intention that you've made and enacting it. So we've talked about this a bit, that the longer the gap, the greater the chance is that something may get in between you and enacting the decision, at least sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. The famous intention behavior gap that psychologists talk about a lot. And it's so one of the kind of tips that naturally emerges from this observation and the understanding of this disconnect as a facet of enactment is that it's better to, if it's a decision that is important to you, it's better to get on and do it and enact it sooner rather than later. And so in the Stop Smoking Services, for example, when the client is discussing with the advisor when the quit date is going to be, and this will always then be something where a decision has been made and it has been and the enactment is delayed, so you're already in that territory. Advisors are strongly advised as professionals to encourage the smoker to make that jump, that leap, as soon as possible. Sometimes it's not possible to do it straight away. You may be about to go on holiday, or there'll be some event that would make it a bit tricky for you to stop. Or you need to take time to get your medication that you're going to use to help you stop and so on. But by and large, carpe diem is the Latin phrase, seize the day, is generally good advice.
And it's interesting how much we're committed to a decision can affect how well, or I suppose how fully, we end up enacting it. So in this case, if someone's really, really committed, they may have something that has really pushed them to stop, and actually something, maybe they've been frightened, or maybe they've seen a possibility of a better life. Maybe they've seen a friend who's quit, and actually their life seems so much better, and they may get a surge of emotion, and that creates a sort of a sense of commitment.
Yeah. So the commitment is obviously another important facet of this stage or phase of the process. And of course, you can always characterize any decision in terms of the level of commitment that a person has to the intention that they've formed. And it can be anything from, I'll probably do this. This is, I'm vaguely interested in doing this, to I'm definitely going to do this. There's nothing is going to stop me, kind of thing. And it's worth paying attention to your own decisions, and when you're looking at other people's decisions, to what that level of commitment is. Bearing in mind, going back to what we were saying just before about this disconnect thing, that commitment can come and go. And so if you're in a situation where you are currently very committed to something and it is important, it sort of interacts with this timing issue, then do it. Don't wait, because that commitment may not last.
Right. So you're kind of striking while the iron's hot, so to speak.
Yes, exactly.
So another aspect or a facet of enacting is how much, how far the decision spreads across different situations. So how consistent it is in some ways across your life. So if you're smoking, I know that it's very much encouraged to if you want to stop smoking, the rule is not a puff no matter what. That's kind of the slogan. But of course, there are people who stop, and I've met people who say, actually, I'm just a social smoker. And there are people who actually, they do seem to just smoke one cigarette, I don't know, every couple of weeks. At least that's what they report.
Yeah, just on that, one thing that we've observed since 2020, when the COVID pandemic hit in the UK, is a large increase in non-daily smoking. And people think of non-daily smoking as social smoking, but actually we've studied this, and it's not necessarily social smoking. A lot of the non-daily cigarettes that are smoked are not in social situations at all. So the social smoking and non-daily smoking are not the same thing. But also worth bearing in mind that non-daily smoking is not necessarily even light smoking, because it can be a pattern in which you smoke, 4 or 5 cigarettes in an evening, and then maybe, you don't smoke for another couple of days, but then you smoke another 4 or 5 cigarettes. And if you look at the number of cigarettes smoked over the week, then it's quite a substantial number, and more sometimes, quite often, than people who smoke daily. So on the one hand, you'd think, well, non-daily, this rise in non-daily smoking, that would be something we should be pleased about from a public health point of view. But it's not as good news as you would imagine it would be. But going back to what you were saying about the consistency of enactment over scenarios, the kinds of things that you might get in smoking are people saying, well, I'm only going to smoke, I've stopped smoking, but I can have the occasional cigarette at a party or something like that. And it's not universally true, but it's very, very largely true that that's not an option for smokers, because of the way that nicotine works on the brain. One cigarette leads to another, and sometimes within days, sometimes within weeks, sometimes within months, you're back to your previous pattern of smoking. And that's always been true for smoking. There are people for whom it's not true, and good luck to them. That's great. But, most smokers, that's not the case. But what this leads to in decision-making is to have a sense in your decision, and when you're characterizing other people's decisions, of the extent to which the intention is being applied across a defined set of boundaries, or every scenario. or whether it's one of these decisions where people allow exceptions or it's limited to certain contexts. And things like smoking are behaviors that are not well suited to leaky decisions that are, you can do in a way that is sort of, I can allow myself to do this a little bit. There are decisions that are like that, but smoking is one of the ones you can't, and it's good to know what ones those are. I think other kind of behaviors that are a bit like that are vegetarianism, for example, where if you come to vegetarianism, let's say in adulthood, having been a meat eater, and then you sort of allow yourself the odd bacon sandwich or whatever, there's a very good chance you're going to be back on bacon sandwiches and other kinds of meat, before too long. So, I think this issue of consistency is something that we need to pay attention to, both for ourselves when we're making decisions, but also if we're trying to understand other people's decisions and the extent to which they're going to stick.
Moving forward, stopping smoking is obviously something that is extremely difficult for a great many people. And there is a question of when you're enacting a decision, when you encounter a difficulty, when you encounter an obstacle of some kind, how persistent you are in enacting that decision.
Yeah, that's again a big feature when it comes to enactment, and of course it's partly related to commitment. Obviously, if you say I'm going to see this through no matter what, that gives you, in many decisions, a better chance of seeing it through than if you're attacking something from a half-hearted point of view. It can also be that decisions get derailed simply because of events that let's say you've decided to stop smoking, you're doing pretty well, but then you lose your job, or you have a terrible argument with your partner or something like that. That kind of thing can derail it. And so persistence in enacting a decision, particularly a decision that is about a behavior that is ongoing, that you could go back to doing a behavior pattern, as we call it, like smoking, drinking, pattern of food consumption, recycling, all those sorts of things. The factors that influence that persistence are things that are very well and widely studied in behavioral science, and we have pretty good idea about the kinds of things that can help maintain persistence and the kind of things that can derail it. But one of the things I think that we probably should pay more attention to in helping people to persist with decisions is the concept of identity and identity change. Because the more you can, once you've made the decision, let's say, to stop smoking, see yourself now as a non-smoker, the more you don't have to keep stopping yourself doing it. I just don't smoke. That's, why would I? And we see in the research that smokers who fairly rapidly adopt a non-smoker identity are more likely to be able to persist with that decision than those who don't, even with other things taken into account, like whether they've had the odd lapse or whatever. So for me, identity is a very important sort of part of your suit of armor, as it were, that protects you from the slings and arrows of events that could otherwise derail a decision.
Yeah, Shakespeare's got a quote for everything, really, doesn't he?
He does. Or whoever wrote those plays.
Yes, whoever wrote those plays, which is very much up for debate in certain circles. I did go down that rabbit hole one time because Mark Rylance and Derek Jacobi, both fantastic actors, have cast some doubt, or that they having acted it, they feel it was unlikely that who people say is Shakespeare is. But Wikipedia seems quite certain it is who they say it is. I myself was quite convinced by the argument it was someone else, just because they said Shakespeare came from, it's a bit of a diversion, but Shakespeare came from a line of, if you were to go down his sort of family tree, from so him in the middle of the, so say, illiterate, greatest writer who ever lived, children illiterate, or something like that. It was,
well, there's a food for thought. And,
I can't verify this, by the way. I'm just repeating what I heard.
Right. Well, Bill Bryson has written, beautifully about this, and actually about Shakespeare's time. And again, to take the diversion to even another level of diversion, we kind of worry at the moment, and rightly so, about the state of the world and how things look as though they might be going to hell in a handcart. But in Shakespeare's day, Europe had just lost 25% of its population through famine, war, and disease. 25% of the population, and there weren't even that many to start with compared with how many we've got now. So that's not to say that, things, that we'd want to go to anywhere near those levels, but it's worth just bearing in mind that in even relatively recent human history, humans have suffered massive catastrophes over long periods. But yeah, that's all very cheerful.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's staggering, though, isn't it? That. Yeah. So another thing is that when we're enacting a decision, it may be we may be monitoring it as we're going and then adjusting as we go, monitoring and adjusting. And I suppose if you're working with a stop smoking advisor, that will be probably weekly check-ins, or you may have an app which does daily check-ins. So we're quite used these days to the concept of monitoring. Everything's monitoring us. We're monitoring ourselves, aren't we?
Yeah. And as you say, apps, that's very much a core part of their sort of what their functionality, what they can do that you couldn't really do with a sort of human stop smoking advisor, for example. And so, I have my Garmin watch, which we might have talked about. I think we mentioned that I switched from a Fitbit because if I went for a walk, I couldn't get it to tell me the time. It would just tell me, what the walk was like.
I think Fitbit, and I have to clarify, I do believe Fitbit have a functionality here if you had discovered that functionality.
Look,
I don't want letters from Fitbit. Saying that we've,
Yeah. Anyway, as you say, other dysfunctional smartwatches are available.
Certainly are.
But yeah, so we're much more used to monitoring things and the facilities are there for us to monitor things more than they were. And with something like smoking cessation, of course, the idea is that you're supposed to not smoke at all. And so I suppose the question is, what might you want to monitor in that situation? What do people monitor? And one of the big things that people monitor is how much they've saved. And that is quite a big factor that motivates continuous abstinence. Other things are where you can do it, and with the stop smoking services, less so nowadays that they're not so much face-to-face, but when they were face-to-face, is that there was what they know as a carbon monoxide test, carbon monoxide, not dioxide. And that was based on the idea that when you inhale any burnt organic substance, you're inhaling, amongst lots of other things, carbon monoxide of the kind that people will die from carbon monoxide poisoning. You're not getting enough of it, obviously, to kill you straight away, but it does do long-term damage to your body over a period of time. But we use it in the stop smoking services to see how people are doing, because when you're a smoker, there's a test that you can do. It's a breathalyzer, basically. You hold your breath and then you exhale into this carbon monoxide monitor. And if you're a smoker, you'll get a level above 10 parts per million, or probably anywhere between 10 and 30 parts per million. And the day that you stop smoking, it'll go down below 10, usually to 5 or fewer parts per million. And what's very interesting is that when smokers see this quite dramatic change in their expired air carbon monoxide levels, that's very motivational. And continuing to see that change, to see that it's right down and showing it to your stop smoking advisor or to whoever it is, I think is certainly part of what has been the treatment process to help people stay motivated. So knowing how things are going, how your decision is going, and the same is true for like step counting for physical activity, or other heart rate or body weight, for example. These are all things that are helpful, very often helpful in helping you to stay motivated and to stay on track with a decision that you've made. But sometimes they tell you that you need to do something differently. You may monitor a decision and it's not going how you thought it was going to go. And then you think, well, actually, maybe I need to do something else. An example might be, let's say that you've got slightly high blood pressure and you've been advised by the doctor, perhaps, they're not necessarily going to say you need to go on medication straight away. Let's try and control it by getting you to lose weight or do a bit more physical activity. And you do that and the blood pressure is not coming down. Then you say, okay, it's not giving me the results that I want to get. What else can I do? What more can I do to try to achieve my goals? So monitoring and adjustment and monitoring and feedback are an incredibly important part of this whole enactment process.
Yeah, it can really be helpful to feel encouraged by seeing, I'm doing really well here. Or alternatively, if things aren't going quite right, what can we change? And that's hopefully the best use of monitoring. We all get a bit stuck in sometimes, at least anyone who monitors stuff gets a bit stuck in kind of, I'm off my Fitbit because I'm just fed up with the kind of constant
nagging.
Sort of, you've got to do this. But anyway, we've covered a lot of ground there. As always, there's always more to cover, but we've reached the end of our time for this episode. And next week, we'll be looking at how time is going to impact this real world decision. So that's going to be really exciting. So it just remains for me to say, Robert, thank you so much for today.
Always a pleasure, Jamie.
And thank you for listening. And please do like and review and subscribe and follow the podcast. Follow us wherever we may go. And links are in the description for everything else that you might need to know. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the Unlocking Behaviour Change podcast.